Welcome to Hannity, and this is a Fox News alert. 19 are dead, around 50 injured during an Ariana Grande concert in Manchester, England. Police are currently treating this incident as an act of terrorism, and they are expected to hold a news conference this hour. Authorities are advising people to avoid the area around the arena, and the train station that is nearby is also closed. Concertgoers describe hearing a loud explosion or explosions as the event ended, causing a massive panic, and one eyewitness is saying that he saw people lying on the ground covered in blood. New video appears to capture sound of this blast. Listen.
No.
Joining us now on the ground via the phone is Daily Mail reporter Jake Wallace. Simon is with us, sir. How are you? Welcome to the program. Can you tell us the latest?
Well, the latest is here on the ground that 19 people have been confirmed dead and 50 people have been confirmed injured. This is a very, very high death toll indeed. We haven't seen an attack this bad in the United Kingdom since 2005, 12 years ago, when 52 people were killed in a coordinated spate of suicide bombings across London. Now, this evening at the moment, things are calmer here at the scene. There's a sense that things are more under control. There's almost an eerie feeling in the air because you just know how much suffering is going on behind closed doors here in the Manchester Royal Infirmary, the hospital just a mile away from the scene here, and also in various hotels around about the scene that have been
Jake,
used
if I may interrupt you,
wounded.
sir, for 1 second. The press conference is starting. Let's go to that.
Of an explosion at Manchester Arena in the city centre. This was at the conclusion of the Ariana Grande concert. Currently, we have 19 people confirmed to have lost their lives in the explosion and around 50 casualties that are being treated at 6 hospitals across Greater Manchester. My thoughts are very much with those that have been injured and lost their lives and their loved ones at this terrible time. We are doing all that we can to support them. Officers from Greater Manchester Police and emergency services are working at the scene and are supporting those affected. We are coordinating the operation here at Greater Manchester Police headquarters. An emergency number is available for all those concerned about their loved ones or anyone who may have been in the area. The number is 0161 856 9400. We are currently treating this as a terrorist incident until we have further information. We are working closely with National Counter-Terrorism Policing Network and UK intelligence partners. This is clearly a very concerning time for everyone. We're doing all that we can, working with local and national agencies to support those affected as we gather information about what happened last night. As you will understand, we are still receiving information and updates, so we'll provide further detail when we have a clearer picture. I want to thank people for their support and would ask them to remain vigilant, and if they have any concerns at all, to report them to the National Anti-Terrorist Hotline. The number is 0800 789 321. It is important also that people here in Manchester avoid the area around Manchester Arena so that emergency services can continue to effectively deal with the incident at that location. Thank you very much.
Have there been any arrests, Chief Constable?
It appears that ends the press conference. Manchester, England, that appears to end the press conference. Manchester News, Sky News covering it. And as we've been talking about here, we're now following everything we've been reported now seems to be confirmed at that press conference. They gave out a number for people that are in Great Britain to call if they had any information that they could share with the police there. Joining us now with the very latest, our own Trace Gallagher. He's in our West Coast newsroom tonight. Trace.
And it's kind of fascinating that news conference, Sean, of what he didn't say, which was pretty much everything. I mean, we have confirmed a number of facts, and all he really did was confirm that it was 19 dead and 50 injured. Yeah, 50 wounded. That number, of course, may change. But what he did not talk about, and which U.S. officials have already confirmed to a number of media outlets, is that this was, in fact, a suicide bomber that hit this arena outside the arena of the Ariana Grande concert. That was talked about early on because we knew as the hospital reports started coming in, they saw wounded people coming in with shrapnel wounds, specifically nail wounds. So they figured this was some type of nail bomb device, and U.S. officials through UK officials have in fact confirmed this was a suicide bomber. What you played at the top of the show, Sean, is fascinating because that was the explosion that was heard on that dash cam video, and what nobody understood was how he was inside his car, the dash cam facing it, and yet you could still hear the explosion very loud, that we thought it initially was inside the building. You had witnesses coming out. Some of them were injured, and they all felt like they heard something, or in fact, they did hear something, they felt some things, but nobody saw anything. There was no smoke seen inside the arena, and then the reports started coming in that the explosion was in the foyer area just outside in the hallway as people were exiting, and you had eyewitnesses saying that in that foyer area they smelled smoke. They smelled kind of a gassy smell, and then you had the arena officials coming out saying that this was, in fact, outside the arena altogether in the box office area that's between Victoria Station and Manchester Arena. For those who don't know the area, this is kind of one contiguous building. The train station kind of goes up into the arena. 21,000 people it seats. It's one of the biggest arenas in the UK. And Ariana Grande, among young people, she is extraordinarily popular. This was packed, according to all counts, with anywhere from 6-year-olds to 20-year-olds. That was the lion's share of the audience, mostly female. And if you look online now, if you look on social media, you see these heartrending pictures of missing children, of parents and families already posting their pictures of missing children as young as 6 years old. Again, we won't show them because it's unconfirmed that they are missing or if they're just being held in some safe house somewhere. There are a number of hotels in that area that have taken in children who do not have or did not have parents waiting to pick them up at the time. So there's a good possibility that some of them were in those hotels. And we should also point out that not only did the constable not talk about where the location of this attack was, there's been no word at all of the breakdown on who was killed and who was injured. No age is given at all. We just know that one man who was probably the clearest eyewitness to date said that he was picking up his family and he looked down the hallway and he saw a number of bodies lying there, and that's when the numbers started coming out: 19 dead, 50 wounded. And again, Sean, that might change, but this is being looked at as terrorism right now, and it certainly has all the hallmarks, though there has been no call for responsibility as of yet.
All right, Trace Gallagher joining us tonight. As I said, the UK police are treating this event as a terrorist attack, a specific attack, in this case, that would be targeting children and young teenagers. Joining us now, our reporter on the ground in Washington, is our own Catherine Herridge, who has been in contact with our own Department of Homeland Security and has a report for us.
Thank you, Sean. Government official confirmed that the Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly is monitoring the situation. He has been briefed, and we should expect a statement from the department in the very near future. Government officials said they are working to assess what happened in Manchester, and they noted the following. They said if it is confirmed as terrorism, it is a level of sophistication beyond the recent UK-based plots that have involved knives and vehicles as weapons. They also pointed to the reports of shrapnel as deeply concerning because this is another indicator of premeditation and a plot that may have been directed by a foreign terrorist organization. Also, reports of the explosion at an exit, that's another indicator suggesting premeditation. Also, a closed space amplifies the concussive effect of the explosion, disfiguring impact of shrapnel, and also maximizing casualties. I asked them if there had been anything in the recent chatter, so this is the discussion through social media and in chat rooms amongst those who are sympathetic or followers of various terrorist groups. And they said it's been very steady among these Islamic terrorist cells, and the call has been to hit so-called soft targets as well as civilians. This person did not go as far as to talk about confirmation of a suicide bombing in this case, but just based on the open-source media reports, it does suggest that's a strong possibility, Sean.
All right, Catherine Herridge in Washington tonight. Joining us now, Fox News senior correspondent Geraldo Rivera from the American Center for Law and Justice, Jay Sekulow, former FBI special agent Manny Gomez. You know, this is the first instance that we know that children have been targeted. We know that children have been used as suicide bombers. We know that children have been indoctrinated. But a specific attack in this case, as police in Great Britain are treating this incident as an act of terrorism, targeting children and young teenagers, Geraldo.
You know, the first thing, Sean, when I heard this news, I did was to text my daughter Simone, who was in the stadium in Paris for that attack in November 2015. And the feeling that a parent has when they don't know the fate of their child in one of these public venues that is under attack by vicious terrorists is indescribable. It's something I will never forget. I pity those parents now, those who don't know what is happening to their youngsters. Ariana Grande, the former Disney star, clearly her fans now middle teens, late teens. This wasn't, and most of them little girls. I mean, this takes a particular pervert, a real sickness. That hatred is so vicious. You know, and I understand from the Sky Reporter that they haven't had a major mass murder on the terror scale, but it was only in March they had the guy in Westminster Palace in London mowing down people, killing 5 or 6. I don't remember the exact number before he was killed. They rounded up 10 people in the plot, many of them from Manchester, from this middle-sized northern English town. It's horrifying. I saw a couple of tweets from groups purporting to be ISIS claiming credit. I don't know that that is confirmed yet, but this has all the hallmarks, particularly with the talk of a nail bomb designed to inflict maximum casualties.
Which is always the case. Jay, I want to go to you, especially I had prepared a show tonight before this act of terror, as they are believing it is in Great Britain, and police are investigating as such, about a tale of two presidents, and that was Barack Obama's apology tour, and specifically the speech in Saudi Arabia that Donald Trump gave this weekend, where he framed this fight against ISIS, and I'm going to give you a couple of quotes here, and other terror groups as a battle between good and between evil. A better future is only possible if your nations drive out terrorists and drive out extremists, he said. He said, drive them out of your places of worship, drive them out of your communities, drive them out of your holy land, drive them out of this earth. And then he said, deny all territory to the foot soldiers of evil. And then he went on to say, it is a choice between two futures, and it's a choice, in this case, America cannot make for you. And he says our friends will never question our support. Our enemies will never doubt our determination. We are not here to lecture. And he goes on from there. I mean, if he understands the nature of this conflict, and this is the conflict that I believe, if the police are right, is on display here in England tonight.
No, that's absolutely correct. And, Sean, it was 4 years ago today that British soldier was hacked to death by 2 Islamic terrorists in southeast London. ISIS utilizes dates as significant, so it was just 4 years ago today. Could it be chance? Yes. Most likely it's not. These are planned. The other thing, as Geraldo said, the utilization of this type of device, which is reminiscent of what took place and has taken place in Israel.
Of your communities. Drive them out of your holy land. And drive them out of this earth.
Manny, I'll say, in considering the location of where he said that compared to 2009 and Barack Obama, by far, and I know the liberal destroy Trump media, tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists are not covering it to the extent they should have. Networks didn't even cover that speech, but he gets it. He has the moral clarity to understand the nature of this conflict.
Absolutely, and he didn't sugarcoat it. and he said it in a venue that was very appropriate. He said it in Saudi Arabia.
Appropriate and courageous.
Appropriate, courageous, and timely. Given today's actions and given the actions that have happened in the world and the United States in the last few months. We've had attacks go on unchecked and without our leaders, our former leadership, saying much about it. Now we have a leader that has come out in their territory and told their leaders, hey, check yourselves.
Let me go. Nigel Farage is joining us. Of course, he was one of the leaders of the Brexit movement and a personal friend of mine. And as the police, I know, in Great Britain are treating this as an incident, an act of terrorism, and as I mentioned and Geraldo mentioned, targeting young children, targeting young teenagers. First, Nigel, as a dear friend, my thoughts, my prayers, and all of our prayers go out to you and our friends in Great Britain and England and Manchester. And your thoughts on what's going on there and what you think this is and what it means.
Well, horrified. I think it marks a new low in terrorism. I mean, to willfully set out to kill and injure young girls, I think it's something that when the nation awakes in the morning, and don't forget this news didn't really break until after midnight our time, I think the country is going to wake up and be very, very shocked indeed. The fact that it happened outside London will also surprise people because we kind of think of terrorist attacks, whether it's the bombings on the Underground or whether it's Lee Rigby, who was killed 4 years ago today on a London street. So they'll be surprised that it took place outside London in our second city of Manchester. And also the fact that it took place in public space. That's going to worry people even more because what do? You can check bags going into a venue, you can scan people, but clearly the way this suicide bomber planned this was to be in a place where he simply couldn't be detected. And I have to say, we are 16 days away from a general election in which open-door immigration and in which dealing with terrorism has to date not even be discussed. I think from tomorrow morning it will be.
You know, Nigel, you and I had many discussions, and I know you supported President Trump when he was a candidate, and I know he's taken great fire and heat for wanting to protect America's borders and of course, vetting refugees from countries whose values they grew up with directly contradict our constitutional values. I've called it a clash of cultures. If you grow up under Sharia law where men oppress women and gays and lesbians and Christians and Jews, we have a right to know if you want to bring those values with you or if you want to assimilate into our societies. I've talked about the Islamization of Europe, and you have warned your friends here in America that we are headed down the wrong path that you believe your country is headed down.
Well, one of the reasons for Brexit, Sean, is, and I made it very clear to the British people, that when Angela Merkel invited 1 million people to come into Germany, totally unchecked, not a security check on a single one of them, but ultimately those people would be able to come to Britain because they'd get European passports. And it was one of the contributory factors to Brexit. I mean, we've got a problem in this country. I think the problem is even worse in France and in Belgium. And one of the reasons that I wanted to support Donald Trump, and I still very much do support Donald Trump, and by the way, I thought that speech that he gave in Saudi Arabia was tremendous. I mean, he looked like a global statesman giving that speech.
I felt for many years that Prime Minister Netanyahu was the lone voice of moral clarity on the world stage. I've even said during the Obama years he was the only adult on the world stage that understood the nature of this evil. And now it's clear that that the Prime Minister now has a partner. And to target, I mean, if you don't believe in evil, if you target children and young adults, I don't think there's anything more profoundly evil than that. And recognizing that truth and confronting it the way he did is so important, I believe, for the safety and security of good and free people around the world. And you're right, by allowing the Islamization of Europe and not checking people's backgrounds, once they get into Germany or France, they also get into the entire European continent.
Yes, and I mean, we've with Brexit given ourselves a chance to deal with this, but we haven't focused too much on it so far in this election campaign. We will now start to have a proper conversation about it. But my feeling is that you in America have got a real opportunity not to make the same mistakes that so many countries in Europe have made. And I think you've got a leader And yes, moral courage. You know, whatever people say about Donald Trump, or, you know, whatever way he might upset them sometimes, whatever fights he occasionally picks and you wonder why he did it, when it comes to the big stuff, Trump has got it absolutely right.
Nigel, our thoughts and prayers go out to you, my friend, and the people of Great Britain.
Thank you.
You have been a very good friend to the United States. We, I'm sure, will want to support you in any way we can. Let me go back to Geraldo. In so many ways, you and I have had, in relatively minor conflict in regard to immigration. You now support a wall. You support a lot of these measures. You've got to admit, Geraldo, the conflict of civilizations. If you grew up under Sharia, and you're a man, and you can oppress women, and you do oppress women. You put gays and lesbians to death. Christians can't build a church. Jews can't build a synagogue. It is a clash of culture that is so wide and deep that we've got to admit a truth here.
Well, I totally agree with the major thrust of your remarks. I'm not going to quibble about my quote-unquote support for a wall. I've withdrawn my objection because I think majority of people in the majority of states have spoken and
because
voted
I've
for
influenced
Donald
you
Trump.
over the years.
Well, I think that Trump has accomplished without a wall what he needs to accomplish on the southern border is close to it. 400 foreign-trained, ISIS-trained fighters have left the United Kingdom to get trained in Syria and Iraq or Iraq to fight there, come back with those deadly skills, bring them home to the UK. Many of them, and this is what makes it so damnable difficult for investigators to see what's happening, many of them leave the country and return because they are native-born, many of them Christian-born. They leave the UK. They say they're teaching English in Afghanistan or English in the Middle East someplace, when really they're fighting for ISIS. They come back. They bring these deadly skills, like the clique that did that fatal mowing down of the folks in March near Westminster, where the British Parliament, native-born, Christian-born, that converted to radical Islam. The attack in Mosul, a suicide bomb attack from a man from Manchester in Mosul just recently. What you have to watch, and I think the key is, when you see kids that were usually in gangs or historically in gangs with guns and so forth are now becoming radical Islamists, and they use the jihad as the kind of context for their violence and their acting out. This is a vicious, low-down and dirty
Now, Jay, I want to be clear to our audience. Police are currently treating this as an incident, as an act of terrorism. We don't have full and complete knowledge of all the facts yet. But there's been so many, and it almost always turns out to be it. It's a perfect time in light of the president's speech to examine all of this. And I think we really need a reassessment as free people around the world. And that is to go exactly to the heart of what the president challenged the Muslim world to do on their own, to throw them out, to get rid of them, or to drive them out of their places of worship, drive them out of their countries. No ground will we cede to them. And it's got to be treated as a cancer in human society. You know, we're indoctrinating these kids, Palestinian kids, when they're 3. They're being taught to hate Jews and Christians and Americans.
Yeah, so this is what the president did was lay out what should have been done over the last 8 years, but President Obama just would not do it. And I don't want to politicize this, but when you have 8 years of the vacuum that was created, no wonder, as Geraldo said, these cell groups metastasized. They went out for training and then came back in. I mean, does anybody want to argue tonight that we shouldn't have an executive order restricting who's coming into the country so that we know who these people are? I mean, does anybody think that tonight? Does anybody want to argue that case tonight, that we should not know from these particular countries of origin who these people are before we let them into the United States of America? I'd like to take on that argument. But to the point you made, this is a significant enough issue now globally. It's hitting everywhere. It's not just in the United States. It's not just in Europe. It is everywhere. That when you look at, when the president says your places of worship, that means you got to go into the mosque and you got to root it out. Into the communities, into those towns. If you see something, you got to report to the authorities. But Sean, it's going to have to also include the Muslim community willing to do this. Because what's happened in Europe, it's been a failed experiment. They allowed in this population, they allowed in Sharia law as to be almost part of the culture within these communities. And it's one thing to respect somebody's culture, but it's another thing to allow them to violate the laws of your country. And that's what's happened here. And we've got right now a situation where you've got an Islamization of of Europe that is significant. Obviously, we're seeing it in the UK. You've seen it in France. You're seeing it in Germany. But let's not think we're not immune to it here in the United States, because we're not immune to it. The plan for the Islamists, I said this when I wrote that book 4 years ago now, 3 years ago, Rise of ISIS, that this was the plan all along, to infiltrate and to inculcate these people. And again, they'll do it to the youth. But here, as we've been saying all night, they picked on young girls. That's who was the target of this concert.
But it's
young
always been.
girls.
Nobody seems to understand the whole caliphate and what the caliphate is. The caliphate is convert or die. The caliphate is a worldwide expansion, and you either accept their way or they will kill you. That's what it says. That's what the ideology is. Look. And hang on, Jay. Let me bring in now the editor-in-chief of Breitbart London, Raheem Kassam, who's with us. You know, all throughout human history, I wrote a book in 2004, and the book was Deliver Us from Evil, and I did a study and a research on Stalin and the gulags and Russia and Nazism and fascism and the killing fields in Cambodia. And in the last century, Raheem, 100 million human souls killed by evil. This is evil in our time, and the two world leaders that are speaking out the loudest, and he was alone for a long time, were the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and now this weekend he has a president that has the same moral clarity as he does.
Absolutely, and you only have to look through social media tonight, Sean, to see that there are anti-Trump people out there in the media and in the comedy sphere who are actually making light of this attack in Manchester, in my home country, in one of the largest cities in my home country. Here's the thing, we have to look at the indicators of this attack. We have to look at the style. We know the Islamic State has recommended to its soldiers around the world to use nail bombs, to use Molotov cocktails. We have to look at other indicators such as populations, around places like Manchester, and then I suggest we start looking up and down places like the United Kingdom, all across Europe, as I recently did when I went on a tour of these infamous no-go zones, and look at what these Muslim populations are saying about the areas in which they are the majority. They are claiming that those are Muslim areas now. They're not shy about it. And what does the Quran say? It says that driving the infidels, driving the non-believers out of Muslim areas, violence is perfectly acceptable in that regard. So while we don't know quite yet, we didn't hear much from the Greater Manchester Police earlier, while we don't quite know yet, we can come to some serious conclusions here.
It's funny because when I have studied the Quran and some of these controversial statements within it, I'm told that my interpretation is wrong, even though when you take the exact verbiage out of there, and I'm willing to listen to those. I've always felt there have been those that have spoken out against evil in their religion. Yes. With all due respect to the Saudis, where the president spoke this weekend, they have played both sides of the fence. They have treated women, they have killed horribly, they have killed gays and lesbians for no reason. They have persecuted Christians and Jews, and they are bigoted, and they do not allow the free practice of religion or freedom of speech or equal rights to women. And what they do to gays and lesbians is evil in our time. They throw them off roofs and they hang them. Now, I want them to take on their radical elements, but they also need to modernize, and we've got to demand that from them as well.
But Sean, I mean, you know, for the last 8 years, you had the most supine, pusillanimous in-chief in Barack Obama. And his first speech in Cairo, you only have to look to that, where he quoted the Quran 3 times, totally out of context, totally using different translations in order to try and bend over before the Arab and Muslim world, and really created the conditions around the world where radical Islam could spread very easily, and where it was excusable around the world very easily. You know, President Trump says drive them out, drive them out. In reality, European leaders, the British Prime Minister, needs to be looking at how we drive these people out of our country, full stop, let alone drive the extremist ideology out.
Raheem, I please convey to all our friends in Manchester and England and all the victims and their families our deepest sympathies, our thoughts and our prayers.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being with us. Joining us now, is our own Shepard Smith. Shep will be picking up the coverage at 11 Eastern tonight, 8 Pacific, as we go off the air. And Shep, what's the very latest?
The latest as we have it is forensic experts have been on scene, which is not surprising, really, Sean. Within about 3 hours after the attack, the various reports we get indicate that it's very clear to forensic experts, this is American officials quoting their British counterparts, very clear that this, to them at least in the early going, that this was a suicide bomber. The wounds on the victims, as reported from hospitals, are shrapnel-like wounds, which would indicate that high temperature caused nails or whatever was in this bomb, presumably, to create what looks like shrapnel wounds on the victims. And then the authorities who arrived there were able to discern that, in their estimation, that this was a suicide bomber in the early going, according to U.S. officials, and many reports here in the United States indicating to them that this may have been a suicide bomber. But, of course, nobody has claimed responsibility. There's no outright confirmation of terror, but,
Shep,
Sean, all the hallmarks are there.
What you're describing sounds a lot like the Sarnev brothers in the Boston Marathon with the pressure cooker that maximized the flow, or if you will, the explosion and the expansion of the shrapnel that they had put in that bomb.
I think one of the things that we can be sure of, Sean, is this: whoever did this, if in fact it does turn out to be a suicide bomber, had that person gotten into the arena and gotten in the middle of a bunch of people where it was concentrated people, it could have been, it's a phrase I don't like to use, could have been so much worse, especially when you're talking about 19 people killed and 50 injured here in the early going. But this, from all reports right now, is this person didn't actually get in. We don't know why. Was it possible that security services stopped them? Sean, I spoke with 2 people live on air tonight who said, well, I had my bag checked. One woman told me I had to throw out a bottle. It sounds like the security was strong enough to where maybe the security kept whoever this was outside, and this person waited for people to come out. I spoke with person after person, Sean, who was a parent waiting for their kids to come out of there, and it was parents who saw the explosion or heard the explosion and ran in to get their kids with all of these people injured and maimed around them. And just so thankful, I think, so many of them were that this explosion did not happen inside. There's nothing good from this, certainly. The only good thing might be that this person wasn't inside amid tightly packed concert goers. As you know, Sean, many of the age of your own children, and it's just a horrifying thing to think about.
You know, Shep, what you're really describing here, as awful as horrible, these numbers are awful and horrible and evil. You're right, inside this could have been, you know, 10 times what we see here. And again, the nature of evil and the threat of our time is monumental and must be dealt with. And by the way, Shep will continue his coverage tonight, 11 Eastern, 8 Pacific. Shepard Smith, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Geraldo, you wanted to weigh in?
Just that the fact that the explosion happened outside, I think 2 things. One is, remember the 3 suicide bombers at the stadium in Paris at that France versus Holland soccer game did not get inside either. Francois Hollande, the president of France, was inside, along with my daughter and her friends, of course. And many of the children were injured as they stampeded out after the fact. But the 3 suicide bombers were thwarted. But what this can say, in terms of if they are now targeting unprotected, open public spaces, this really is the next frontier in the war in the clash of civilization.
I don't want to interrupt your flow, but we've seen this all throughout Israel. Pizza parlors, malls. We've discussed, you and I, on this program and privately, what's the next layer? It's going to be the Mall of America. It's going to be, you know, we'll wake up one day, simultaneous surface-to-air missiles taking out commercial airliners. We're not ready, Geraldo, in my opinion.
We're not. And you look at the nut job in Times Square. I don't know what motivated him, schizophrenia or post-traumatic stress or whatever it was, but it could as easily been an Islamic terrorist. People are vulnerable in open societies. That's why it's a clash of civilizations. They want to shut down the way we live. They want to punish our civilians for what's happening in their countries, even after we wipe out ISIS.
Well, they want to convert you. They want you to convert, Geraldo, or die.
And I think that is definitely one of their fantastical notions.
You lost some friends on 9/11. I did. Manny, you lost friends too. And I think Geraldo is right. And maybe I interviewed Prime Minister Netanyahu the time before this most recent interview, and the last words he said in the interview to me, a preview of coming attractions for you, America, because he always said, that Israel was the little Satan, but that we are viewed as the great Satan, and obviously Europe is in the mix as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're viewed as the great Satan because we're helping the little Satan protect their interest as well as our interest in that area. By the same token, we just given a weapons deal to Saudi Arabia over $100 billion. And so we need to hold them accountable to put their people under notice that their government will not accept anything.
Manny, stay right there.
Sure.
We have Sky News has just aired new video of this explosion at tonight's concert in Manchester. Listen to this. Wow, that was extremely loud. Joining us now with reaction to that, Fox News national security expert, Dr. Waleed Fares. Dr. Fares, your reaction to our discussion and the news out of Manchester tonight.
Sean, the message here is very important to analyze. The individual or the team, the unit, who perpetrated this horrible act are really acting as a group that wants genocidal results. That means they are mass killing children. This tells me that the ideology behind it and the movement behind it, because this is not just an individual, this has been organized and this has been inspired by others, is an ideology and a movement which knows that now after Riyadh, after this address in Riyadh, there is a rise of a worldwide coalition. They're trying to intimidate, they're trying to tell us that they're going to continue the struggle, not just in the Middle East, but in Europe and even here in the United States.
Yeah. You know, you and I have discussed at length radical Islamic terrorism. And again, I want to be clear, they're treating this as an incident, as an act of terrorism. We haven't confirmed. Many experts I'm talking to believe that the fingerprints of the type of attacks that we've seen in the past are very similar to what we saw in Manchester tonight. And Waleed, there's one other thing that President Trump said in Saudi Arabia. He said, terrorists do not worship God, they worship death. Your life will be empty, your life will be brief, and your soul will be fully condemned. I don't know anybody that was as truthful, honest, and outspoken on this issue than the president bravely speaking out in Saudi Arabia.
He needed to deliver that speech. Actually, the past two presidents needed to deliver that speech since 9/11, certainly not in the last 8 years. But by addressing them with this clarity, he's now mobilizing them and also pushing them to be responsible. The next day, they said they're going to have an army of 34,000. These are the troops that we need in Syria and in Iraq and maybe in Yemen and in Libya. But beyond that, what is important is that for them to wage an ideological war, this is where we need them. Yes, they launched this Center of Counter-Extremism, but they need to do more, to spend more on these issues, because the network we are facing is not just in the Middle East. It's now inside, it's embedded in the West.
Yeah, Jay Sekulow, I'll bring you back in if I may. And, you know, again, we go back to those statements. Those are pretty strong, powerful statements. And probably the only person I know that has come close to it with that moral clarity that I discussed is the Prime Minister of Israel.
Well, I think it's very much of the same kind of approach, and that is you've got to call this exactly what it is. And he did this, understand who he did this in front of, 50 leaders from Muslim countries that understand the nature of the threat as well. So this was historic both from not just from perception, but reality, because what the president did was issue a clarion call, and that call was, we cannot tolerate this, and you, the Muslim world, have to engage this. You have to engage it at the most serious of levels, in your community, in your worship centers. That's where this has to go. Now, what's the horrific nature of this event in Manchester, England, should be sending a message to the rest of the world, though, because we had this in the United States. Remember this. They are looking for those soft targets. Remember the airport incident in Fort Lauderdale. Remember that it was in the baggage claim area. The person went off, got the weapon, came back in. We have to recognize now there is no such thing as a safe zone. And we have to govern ourselves accordingly, which means our security apparatuses, our intelligence gathering have to be utilized at the most sophisticated level. And that doesn't mean it stops this, by the way, Sean, but you got to root this out at the core, and there is no time is of the essence here. We can't waste an hour.
You know, one of the things that I think the world's going to have to come to grips with is a very simple thing, and I thought I saw this on Saturday. No apologies, no political correctness, right. And, you know, no happy talk, no Pollyanna, you know, fantasy living, and draw a line. there is good and there is evil. As I mentioned earlier, 100 million human souls, communism, fascism, Nazism, Imperial Japan, the killing fields in Cambodia. You know, you put it all together, that's 100 million human beings slaughtered. This is not a game. And if we treat this with, oh, we've got to be kind and we can't offend people, people are going to die because we're weak. We've gotten, by the way, Sky News, a longer version of the video showing the explosion from inside the Manchester Arena. That's just breaking. Let's play that.
What's going on? Oh my God!
Wow, that sounds exactly like an explosion that is strong, deep, powerful, and as we pointed out, Geraldo, if that had happened in a different location based on what we're being told and Shep reported, I shuddered to think the damage, the murder, the death, the destruction.
The one caution on these casualty figures we're getting now is it is always worse than initially
By the way,
reported.
Sky just went up to 59 injured. NBC has 20 dead. We have 19 here at the Fox News Channel. Still a dramatic toll, and it could have been worse based on what we're learning.
And remembering that there
dramatically
were
worse
children, generally speaking, little girls, teenagers, and younger at the concert. So the casualties, picture the hospital in your mind. When you picture these horrific events, you think of adults being victimized. But in this case, the most vulnerable part of your population being torn to shreds. These are not kind weapons. This is not a bullet. This is these nails where multiple pieces of shrapnel tear at each little body. It is absolutely horrifying when you think of it.
The shrapnel you're talking about, I just recently watched, coincidentally, a post-Sarnav Brothers Boston bombing video, lives, just the injured. It has been since that time. I know we're in the news business. We have to move on. We talk about other stories, but the deadly aftermath that these people live with day in and day out. Stay right there. From the Heritage Foundation, Niall Gardner, and the president for the Security Studies Group, Jim Hansen. Jim, you had some pretty controversial remarks. You want to address it with our audience?
I don't know what's controversial about noting that this is
the way
Islamic
the media covered it.
extremism.
I stand corrected and apologize.
No worries, Sean. I think the problem we have right now is we live in an open society, as you mentioned. We cannot secure ourselves, we cannot hide, and we need to recognize that the Islamists are attacking us, as President said, and we need to do something about it. So the only way to stop them is to look at the ideology, to look at where they live, where they worship, and where they're being told to commit these kind of acts, and conduct the surveillance necessary to catch them before they do it, not pick up the pieces afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And did you want to respond? Go ahead.
Absolutely. Proactivity is the name of the game. We have been reactive in the prior administration. This administration is a lot more proactive. We have General Kelly as our Department of Homeland Security Secretary. We are posturing ourselves to be strong militarily, strong internally with our security operations. And make no mistake, this is scarier than the Boston bombing, because this is somebody that took their lives